All right, so this is the third week of our series called Anchor, and it's based on what we kind of, in our last series, looked at hope a little bit, and we said we need to have an anchor in difficult times. We need to have an anchor for what we're feeling and thinking as things go on around us. And so when we started this series, we said we wanted it to be practical, and there's a lot of things that we want to make practical. So when we started the series, we started talking about the abuse of power, and we've seen that happen not just in our government today, but throughout governments in history. We've seen this abuse of power. We talked about when the economy is shaky. And we talked about things about being affordable, and we know that for many people, things are not affordable. And last week we went into that, and so this week we're going to talk about when the truth feels unreliable. Many people don't know what to believe, right? Because there's so many different stories, there's so many different people who are coming out and saying, no, I've got stats, I've got data, I've got this. And we're like, but then somebody else has data that often contradicts what you're saying. So let me give you an instance. Immigration and public safety has been an issue, right? It's been an issue that has been made one of those like main issues, those main things. Many of them say that crime is on the rise because of our current immigrant situation, right? There's so much crime now, and people are dying in the streets because of these immigrants. And we say, no, people are dying in our streets because of our government. And yet there's the thing, right? So during the last election series, and there's lots of things that get spoken of, but there's so many things about the immigrant population that were spoken of. Back in Ohio, they were talking about them eating cats and dogs, and they said there was based on one story that said, I'm next to an immigrant neighbor and my pet is missing, and I think they ate it. Right? That was the reason for the whole thing to be spread out. It was like, no, now they're eating all the cats and the dogs. Right? It wasn't true. But when you try to be able to make somebody believe a lie, you just keep saying the thing that you're going to say over and over again until people start to be able to say, well, maybe there's some truth to it. There's different studies, there's headlines, and lots of people come to their own conclusions. But when it comes down to what do we do with all of this? This is one headline, one story about immigration and public safety. And yet here's what happens to the whole thing is that it gets people to a position to be able to say, I don't know what's true. And who's reliable? Is anyone reliable? Is anything reliable? And this is when we start to be able to feel that, right? When you start to be able to feel like truth is something that's unreliable, then everything starts to shake. Everything starts to be able to say, I don't know what to trust. I don't know who to trust. I don't even know if there should be anything that I would trust. And then it becomes much like what it says in the scriptures. It becomes like this waves and tossing back and forth because it's exhausting and it's destabilizing, right? We don't know where we're supposed to stand when everything is shaking. And if I don't know what's true, we don't know who to trust. And eventually it leads to say, I don't even know what it means for my life and living. And so that passage that we have today was Jesus when he was arrested, when he was brought before Pontius Pilate by the Jewish leaders. And Jesus goes into this. We're going to get into the passage here in a second, so don't worry, we won't zip past it here. But here's the thing that happens, right, is that Pilate gets to this spot where he says, what is truth? And when we get into a situation like what we have today, when there's so many things that people are trying to tell us, the things that we see, no, you didn't see that. The things that we believed were true, no, don't believe that. We're like, what is truth? And that's what I hope to be able to uncover for us to be able to see today. So let's go to John chapter 18. John chapter 18, verse 33 through 38. We're going to read this once again. You just heard it just a second ago, but it's always good to repeat it. So Pilate went back to the headquarters and called for Jesus to be brought to him. Pilate says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus replied, "Is this your own question, or did others tell you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate retorted. "Your own people and your leading priests brought you to me for trial. Why? What have you done?" Jesus answered, "My kingdom is not an earthly kingdom, and if it were, my followers would fight to keep me from being handed over. But my kingdom is not of this world." So Pilate says, "So you are a king?" Jesus responded, "You say I am a king. Actually, I was born and came into the world." And here's the thing, what Jesus is saying in his own mouth. He says, "I came into this world to testify to the truth. To the truth. All who love the truth recognize that what I say is true." That's when Pilate says, "What is truth?" See, I think what we've always thought about with Pilate is that he was asking a curious question. Like he was actually trying to be able to pontificate on whether or not this whole idea, what is truth? Because there's lots of philosophers during that time period that were asking similar questions. What is truth? Right? And they would have lots of philosophical conversations based around it. But I don't believe that this is a curious question. He wasn't trying to dig into the philosophy. He was really, after Jesus' statement of saying, "I've come to testify to the truth, and those who follow me will also want to be able to hear the truth." And that's when he says, "What is truth?" as not a curiosity, not a question really. It's really a resignation. He's saying, I don't know. I don't even know what truth is, so I guess I'm just going to walk away. You see, I wonder if Pilate got to the same position that we find ourselves in, that everything becomes unreliable to him. Maybe he's heard a lot of truth from the Roman Empire that says, no, this is what needs to be done. This is how things are going to get handled. If there are people in the street that are protesting, that you go and murder them. This is the thing. This actually happened in Rome too. History repeats itself. Pilate got in trouble many times for actually doing the same thing. He would send soldiers out there. If there was an uprising, put them down. You see, now is this the truth of what should have been done? Humanity speaking? No, that's never what should be done. But I wonder if Pilate himself got to that place in his own heart that he started to say, I don't know what truth is. I'm just going to listen to those in authority over me. And is that where we've gotten ourselves to be resigned to this idea? Well, what really is truth? Let's move on. But he chooses convenience over the truth, because he's saying, I could dig into this a lot more. I can try to be able to call lots of witnesses in here. I can try to do the whole thing. But he's like, I don't really know what to do with this. That he's not speaking any. Jesus didn't say anything that would have convicted him. There was nothing that came out of Jesus' mouth that would have been convictable offense for death. But it was easier for Pilate to be able to say, no, we're just going to pass on this. All right, what is truth? Let's move on. See, truth isn't rejected because it's unclear. It's rejected because it's costly. If Pilate believed that the words coming out of Jesus' mouth were the truth, there would be no possible way that Pilate would have said, let's move him to execution. But if he defended Jesus, the Jewish leaders would have led a revolt. It could have cost Pilate his position. It could have even imprisoned him based on it. Truth becomes unstable. And when it becomes unstable everywhere, then the lies become tools. Right? Those lies then are saying, I'm going to craft a lie that's going to be able to be used for all kinds of people to be able to kind of receive, right? You see, the tool is that they know everything's kind of shaky right now, and they're, I don't know what to believe, and I don't know how to be able to take this in. I don't know any of it, right? And becomes unshake. And then it's like, well, let me just feed a couple of lies and see where they land. And that tool is being used today. And because the tool is being used, then fear becomes the currency. Right? Fear is the thing that they're saying, we want people to live in fear, period. And when they're living in fear, they're going to hear those lies, and they're not even going to be shaken anymore because they're just going to take them in. Because fear is then what we know. Fear is the circumstances that we live in. Because then power then also replaces accountability. No need for accountability anymore. Because we're just going to use the lies as tools to be able to escape the fact that what we're doing is wrong. No one needs to hold us accountable if we create the law and the system by which we're going to be able to continue to do things and work and be. And even if it's against everything that we've ever done, no accountability because we've recreated a system. A system of lies, a system of fear. So what happens when we're living in that and we're just surrounded by this constantly, just like when we see Jesus and the things that are happening for Pilate and that world around them, everything, like we become cynical, right? Or, two options really. We become cynical, meaning like nothing matters, there's no hope, there's no peace, there's no rest, everything is crumbling. Or here's the thing. The other option is this: we become the rigid ones and say, we are going to create the law. And my law is going to be the best law to follow. And if you don't follow my law, then I'm going to say that you are the ones who are going to hell. You see, the cynical side is the easier side, I think, to fall on, but maybe not. Especially as followers of Jesus, we can be in a system that we have a system of laws already. God has given us law. We know that the law of God is out there. We know that God actually says that He wrote it in our hearts. We know that it's there. And so then we can also say, God, I'm going to be cynical of even that law that you've put in my heart and still just say, no, we're just going to leave this here and I'm just going to live this whole life as a cynic. Or we can just say everything has to be done like this, and if it's not, then you're the one that's in the bad. There's a problem with both sides. We've given up or we've dug in. And neither is going to be good. Let's look at this one passage here. John 18:37. This is a repeat, right? So Jesus responded, "You say I am a king. Actually, I was born and came into the world to testify to the truth, that all who love the truth recognize that what I say is true." So Jesus does not define truth, he embodies it. And this is key for us to be able to understand. Because when we talk about this, and we can say when we're living in that life as a cynic, even as followers of Jesus, we can be cynical. And we can say, Jesus, I really don't know what truth is. And Jesus is saying, no, I'm trying to embody it for you. And then we're saying, but let's even look at the Scriptures. The Scriptures are hard. There's a long history of the Scriptures being written. We got lots of different authors, lots of different genres of Scripture, lots of different places. The things could have been messed up. And really, the truth of Scripture is really found in that same kind of character of God. God says, when you see God's character, when you know God's character, even when you're reading into the Scriptures and you're finding the places that are really difficult, the places where it says, well, God told us to murder everybody. And it's like, is that consistent with God's character? No. Okay. So if we find the truth of who God is, when we're looking to Jesus, and Jesus is saying, I'm embodying the truth, then we say, Jesus, we're going to have to listen to what you have to say. So then truth is not something that we possess, but it's something that we follow. And when we're following Jesus, and Jesus is saying, I'm embodying the truth, I'm trying to embody this truth for you, so that when you are saying, love God and love neighbor, this is how we're going to try to be able to do that, because Jesus says this is the truth. This is what we are to do. He breaks everything down. Love God and love people. Okay, Jesus, tell me how to do that. I want to do that well. But here's the problem. We've got a sea of voices. A sea of voices. Now, when we look at this, we've never had so many voices talking about things. When we have podcasts, we have YouTube, we have the internet, we've got Substack. We've got all these people writing. We've got all these people blogging, all these people who are saying things, all the voices that are out there. And we're trying to be able to wade through it like we're in the water trying to swim. And when we've got this sea of voices, it also can become so loud. Paul knew about these voices. Because when we get into the next part of our verse from Ephesians chapter 4, let's just jump there now. Paul's going to be looking at, and he's saying, like, we're tossed around. Ephesians chapter 4:14. Paul says, then we will no longer be immature like children. We won't be tossed and blown about by every wind of new teaching. We will not be influenced when people try to trick us with lies so clever they sound like the truth. Instead, we will speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ, who is the head of his body, the church. He makes the whole body fit together perfectly. As each part does its own special work, it helps the other parts to grow, so that the whole body is healthy and growing and full of love. So we're tossed back and forth by every teaching that's out there, everything that some voice says, and then we go down this rabbit hole and we're saying, okay, this guy or this lady, this person, they've got something really good to say, and it kind of catches our ear, and then we go down the rabbit hole and we're saying, just tell me everything that you know then. And then we go down that same rabbit hole and we're saying, just give me all your truth, because it sounds good to me. And then we find out that it's got some other version of things that are in there. And guess what? There is no teacher besides Jesus who has ever been flawless. I, in my teaching, have never been flawless. Teachers have flaws. And here's the thing, when we err, we should be able to say, okay, let me look at this again. Let me see where I have erred based on what God has already given to me. Now, this is what we'd want for every single person out there to be able to do, and yet it doesn't always happen. When we jump into the sea of voices, we're, of course, tossed back and forth and back and forth and back and forth until we are so dizzy that we can't find ourselves even wanting to stand. So what does it mean being anchored? When we're anchored, it means that we're going to be firm even in the sea of voices that are trying to toss us back and forth. And where being anchored means that we're not going to be easily manipulated, that we're not going to be driven by outrage, and we're not going to be formed by the algorithms that are trying to be able to shape us. All the social media that we have in the world today is all driven by algorithms. These same algorithms are giving you what you want to hear. Right? It's giving you that same sea of voice that's saying, no, follow this path. Go down this path. We want you to be fearful, and we want you to be angry, and we want you to be hateful, because then that drives you against this person over here who's got their own algorithm. And they've got this sea of voices over here, and now you're going to clash, and all of that fear and all of that anger and all of that hatred is now going to drive us to be more divided. So what's forming you? What's forming your anchor? We want to be anchored into Christ, yes. But we also know what is good for us is to be in that community. We want Scripture, yes, to be informing us. We want our community to be able to help us, right? Because this is what we're going to see every day. Our community should be helping form us. But we also want a love that speaks the truth with gentleness. This is the part that it gets hard. I don't always speak the truth with gentleness, because I've got some of that anger inside of me. I've got that same kind of like vitriol, that same kind of like, and this is what injustice does to my heart. It leads me to a place not to just be like, okay, this is not good. No, I'm angry. The things that are happening, don't just say, oh, well, maybe it was an accident. I'm angry at injustice. I'm angry that people are being murdered. I'm angry that people are being othered and put into those boxes that says, no, that box is bad. And because you're in it, that means you're bad. And that means you're bad, and that means you're evil. That means you're against everything. And somehow what we have to be able to do when we are living in community with one another is to be able to say, have you thought about this truth? You see, in those parts, it sharpens one another. Because when we live in our bubble of the sea of voices, we don't hear anything else. And yet we need somebody to be able to say, hey, let's talk through this. Not so that I can say injustice is not going to be that important to me anymore. No, that's not what we're going to do. Because these things anger God's heart, it also should anger our heart. But instead, in this community of people that we have, we're saying we're all in the same community. Let's figure this out together. Let's talk about where have we strayed? Where are we going off in this direction that's never going to be able to be of any use to anybody? How can we be centered and anchored? Let's find a place to be able to do that together. Psalm 119, 105. This is one that I mentioned last week. But this is the passage that what I use quite a bit, especially when we're stuck in some of these places that we don't want to be stuck in. This is the passage that says, God, you are a light to my path. Right? And it doesn't say you're a light to every part of the journey, to the whole road. He says, no, just the next step. And that's all that we need for right now. Because if Jesus, just lit up the whole path and he's just like, yeah, that's the direction, go over there, right? Then we're like, okay, that can be overwhelming. But what we can do today when we are embedded with all of these different lies that are being told, we just say, Jesus, just give me the next one. Where should I walk today? What's the next step that I can take today? Because here's the thing, hope doesn't require full certainty. Hope doesn't say, you know what, everything is certain. It just says this, we're certain that God's going to be faithful in the next step, and the next step, and the next step. So when we are practicing this practical faith, and this practical faith response in the midst of all these things that are being shared when truth feels unreliable, then this is what we should do. We should resist sharing what we haven't discerned. When you're looking at what you're sharing, what you're trying to be able, and not just social media, right? But what are we sharing individually? What are we talking through with other people? When we haven't discerned for ourselves, is this the truth? Then we shouldn't be looking at trying to be able to spread it. We should be listening more than we are reacting. This goes to community. It goes to the people that are around us, right? Here in our own church, we can say, how am I listening to other people? How can I do that before I'm going to off and reacting? Before I'm trying to be able to light the world on fire, let's try to be able to listen. And then how do we speak? Once we've discerned, once we've listened, how do we then speak without contempt? And again, I told you that's hard. How do we speak without sounding hate-filled? How do we speak without turning people away before we even finish the sentence? You see, there's going to need to be a lot of grace. We need to know that the grace that God has for us is the same grace that we can show to others. And we can say, my speech and the truth that I will speak will not be filled with contempt, but will be filled with grace. Every week we've gone over this verse from Hebrews. It says we have this hope as an anchor for our soul. And Hebrews gives us that, and it's something that's kind of like this, we would call the series verse, because the whole thing anchored is based on this. We have a hope as an anchor for our soul. You don't need to have all the answers. No one does. But we can trust the one who is trustworthy. So when truth is unreliable, Jesus remains faithful. And that's where our hope has to be anchored. Because anywhere else, it's going to become shaky. The foundation won't be steady. But when we hold on to that hope, the anchor that is in Jesus, he says he's come to testify to the truth, and those who follow him will know that truth. And then bringing in one passage from Jesus when he says, and when you know the truth will set you free. In Jesus' name. Please stand and pray with me.